Hello everyone, this is Miss Wills. We're going to be continuing on with Act 4, Scene 2 of this second part of the lesson. So where we finished off in the last clip was I asked you to consider the contrast of setting, contrasting Macbeth's castle with Macduff's castle. So Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's home, their domestic space, in comparison to Macduff's domestic space as well. So when we look at Macduff's home, this is a space that was associated with innocence and purity, with children, with maternal instincts. And we've got this innocence and purity highlighted through the naivety of Macduff's son, when he's asked, so what's a traitor? And things like that. It is presented as a domestic space as it should have been during this time, the natural way. The mother at home protecting the child and nurturing the child. The domestic space is very much back then considered to be a feminine space, okay? It's where the mother nurtures her children. There's also a constant reference to Macduff's home being a space that represents good in comparison to evil that Macbeth represents. And we have reference that Lady Macduff says she has done no harm. Heaven preserve you. They're very much kind of associated with heaven and holiness in comparison to the Macbeth's home and their domestic space. So I want you to think about as well in this scene, if we've got this, their home symbolizing the natural order, the natural way the domestic space is supposed to look, supposed to be. We have Macbeth's men coming in and ripping that apart. That is another example of how Macbeth is destroying the natural order of things and causing chaos in society as well. Not just society, but also within the home. Okay, within that private space. So, bearing that in mind, what I'd like you to think about and what I'd like you to complete is this sentence here. So we thought about Macduff's home. I now want us to think about the Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's domestic space. So where the Macduff's home represents innocence, purity, and the natural order, Macbeth's castle and his home and domestic space, what does that represent in contrast? So I would like you to pause this recording and please complete that sentence. If you can, please do support with quotations. Okay, so some ideas you might have come up with here is, it represents evil, where the Macduff's home and their domestic space represents all that's natural, all that's innocent, good. Here we have evil because, again, in Act 2, Scene 3, we kind of have reference to the gates of hell in their home. If a man were porter of Hellgate, as well, we had the death of Duncan, so we had treachery in there, we have deception that it's associated with, but not only that, where the domestic space is kind of supposed to be, quite a feminine space. The man goes out, he fights the wars back then, he works, he provides, the woman is at home. A feminine space where the woman is at home, nurturing, protecting their children, raising their children. We have with Lady Macbeth here, she calls on spirits to rid her of her femininity and weakness, to rid her of that. So it becomes very much a masculine place, and associate with this masculinity as violence, is death, etc., especially back then. So that's kind of where we have the natural order of things, even within the home, being disrupted, and that's symbolized, of course, through Lady Macbeth and Macbeth as well. Okay, moving on then. Throughout this scene, we get a lot of bird imagery and bird metaphors. What I'd like you to do is reread the scene. I'd like to highlight where you come across any reference to birds or any metaphors using the image of birds. So please, can you pause this recording and carry out that activity? Okay, so just thinking firstly where else we've come across bird imagery in the play. Now here's a quote from Act 2, Scene 4. So this is after Duncan has been killed. We have the quote, "A falcon towering in her pride of place was by a mousing owl hawked at and killed." So this is when we are getting kind of the description of nature and how every nature and the natural way of things is just it's kind of being destroyed at the moment after the regicide. So what is Shakespeare emphasizing here? I just want you to think about what is he emphasizing? Who is the falcon in this metaphor, and who is the owl as well? So I just want you to pause this recording again and to write down any ideas in relation to that quote for me, please. Okay, so perhaps you got something along the lines of this dance. In this instance, the falcon represents King Duncan and the owl Macbeth. So it is unnatural for an owl to attack a falcon, and Shakespeare's possibly highlighting how unnatural the murder of the king was. So this idea of breaking the natural order of things again, and he's causing all this chaos by doing that, which again, as we've discussed, he is also continuing to do when he sends murderers to go and kill Macduff's family. So let's think about what the bird metaphors represent in Act 4, Scene 2 then. So we have two quotes here. The first one, the poor wren, the most diminutive of birds, will fight her young ones in her nest against the owl. And the second one, poor bird, thou'st never fear the net, nor lime, the pitfall, nor the gin. So just in reference to this second quote here, when she talks about fear the net nor lime, the pitfall nor the gin, basically what they are methods of trapping or things to trap and kill a bird, okay? So that's what she's referring to there, ways in which you trap a bird. So bearing that in mind, I would just like you for me to pause this recording again, and I'd like you just to write down underneath these two quotes, what do you think they say? What are they saying? What is Shakespeare highlighting here through this? Okay, so here's just some ideas on the next slide here. So for the first one, we have the owl, again, represents Macbeth. So we have that repetition and consistency of Macbeth, being associated with the owl and how it's unnatural, the owl, being so murderous, and how he's become the predator and the hunter of all that is innocent. So we've got, this kind of poor wren, this innocent wren that her children and her child represents. He preys on the defenseless and the powerless, it seems to be here. In this case, is Macduff's family. It also highlights both Macduff's failure as the protector of the family and symbolises Lady Macduff's strong maternal instinct, in contrast to Lady Macbeth. For the second one here, it emphasises the innocence of a son who is naive and fearless against evil at the moment. He seems very naive against everything that's going on. Highlights how Macbeth is so corrupt that he's willing to destroy the helpless and innocent. At this point, the audience might lose any sympathy they may have for Macbeth. So there's just some ideas. Okay, so the final thing we're going to consider is, so what is Shakespeare's purpose here? What is he doing in this scene? What is he trying to highlight, perhaps? So we've got some ideas here. So of course, King James I was on the throne at the time that Macbeth was being performed on stage. And it is often said that Macbeth was written with James I in mind. So here we have a scene that is perhaps kind of identifying the fact that King James wants to warn the society against rebelling against the king. Macbeth, in this scene, Macbeth, it may serve as a stark reminder of what it is to be considered as good and evil, and also remind an audience of just how dangerous traitors are. So here's an example of an innocent family. Okay, I will remind you, possibly is what Shakespeare is saying here, of what a traitor is and what a traitor looks like, because we do have this exchange between Lady Macduff and her son, where her son asks her, what is a traitor? And she goes on to explain what a traitor is. Perhaps in asking this question, the son Shakespeare amplifies what a traitor is, and he makes it very distinct, and he distances this idea of a traitor from world of innocence and purity and the natural way of things that the child represents. So he's saying, if you do plot against the king, you are then distancing yourself from this world of innocence and purity and this natural world. So it's kind of like a warning as well. So, finally, guys, over to you. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to write a little paragraph in response to one of the questions below, just as a kind of summary of what you've learned this lesson. So remember to use quotes to support your points as well, please. So you can either answer the first question, which is what does Shakespeare's use of contrast emphasize in the scene? Second question, what does Shakespeare's use of bird imagery emphasize? And finally, how does this scene develop themes of treachery, bravery, and corruption of innocence? So you choose the one you want to answer, and please give that a go. Okay, thank you very much for listening to this recording today, guys. And if you do have any questions regarding the work, please email your teacher.